Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. Just once again, before we start, just to check, did you all get the information about Zoom? Are you all connected on Zoom to get access to translation? Can you thumbs up? And so on Zoom, you can choose the channel that you want, and then you stay in that channel because we will have people speaking in Portuguese and in Spanish. So if you can, if you're on the translation, please connect to Zoom. Okay, I think a few more people might be coming, but let's get started. So first of all, I wanted to thank you very much for being here. Those of you joining online and those of you who are here face to face. This is first of a series of 3 seminars organized by the GRRIPP project. So GRRIPP is a project about gender and resilience that is hosted here at UCL in the Institute for Risk and Disaster Reduction, and more specifically in the Center for Gender and Disaster. It's a 4-year project which had the main aim at commissioning projects around the world, so in Latin America, South Asia, and Africa. And our goal was for that those projects to teach us about gender resilience. So we redistributed funds to the different partners who commission those local projects, and they are the ones who have been making what GRRIPP is today. And so those 3 seminars are an opportunity for us to learn from them. So tonight we have 6 guests coming from Chile, Brazil, the Dominican Republic, Zimbabwe, and India. They all work on the themes of tonight, so care, livelihoods, and gender. They will introduce themselves way better than I could do. And then we will have 2 other events, one in March and one in May. So by the end of this process, we'll have a chance to bring everyone to London and hear from all of our projects. Before I give the floor to them, I just wanted to thank some people, starting with the center and the department, our founder UKRI, and more specifically for this event tonight, the GNCA Newton Fund. I want to thank my team, and sorry, I'm going to have to say names. It's a little bit long, but it's important. I want to thank you, Maureen, principal investigator, for supporting this idea and obviously for getting us through this whole project. I want to thank all my colleagues who have been giving so precious help to make this event happen. Our finance team, Nadia, Rui, and Deborah, thank you very much. Thanks to all the colleagues who were involved with the logistics, all the tiny details from setting up the Zoom link, booking rooms in a hotel, booking flights, booking catering. Valerie, who is not here tonight, but she did a lot of behind the scene work. Virginie, 2 Jesses, Jessie and Jess Roberts, Zara, Livy, and Olivia. Thank you so much for your precious help. Thank you to the translators. Thank you to you, the audience, for being here. And thank you so much to our speakers. And it's only 1 person per group speaking tonight, but they came in pairs. So we have 14 guests. Thank you to all of you for being here. It's such a great honor and pleasure for us to have you here and be able to learn from you and to listen to you. So without further ado, I will give you the floor and ask you first to introduce briefly yourself and your project, starting with Gloria.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Gloria Sepulveda. I'm a sociologist. I come from Chile. I am a caregiver and I have a sister who has a disability. I am an activist from an organization called Ciudadanas Cuidando. Citizens Caring is an organization of people dedicated to caregiving in Chile. And today, I am with Nutris and my colleague, Veronica Contreras, and I would also like to greet my other co-workers, Andrea Solar and Margarina Solar from Chile, who were also part of the executive team of the project that was financed by GRRIPP. And we also work in care. So thank you very much. Hello, I am Olga Segovia, also from Chile, just like Gloria. I come from Red Mujer y Hábitats América Latina y el Caribe, so the network Women in Habitat from LATAM and the Caribbean. We had a workshop called Cities and Territory Systems of Care with a Gender Approach. We worked on this project, we elaborated a diagnostic. It was very interesting work done in the area of Bogota, in Buenos Aires, and Córdoba, and also in Santiago, in Chile.
My name is Silvanete. I come from Brazil. I'm here representing a network. I'm agriculture, I'm a farmer in my region of Ribeiro, but I represent a network of several territories. And those territories represent traditional communities, indigenous communities, but also quilombolas. And here we have Davidson, who came with me, and he's also Brazilian. And we are a team that work in the state of Pernambuco, in northeast of Brazil, and I am in the sertão of Brazil, which is Caatingas, in a dry region in Brazil. The work we have been doing there is based in a cosmonucleation and the knowledge that is the knowledge of the indigenous people that are very diverse in each territory.
Hi, I'm Lib Diaz from the Dominican Republic. I am the president of the Organization of Working Women, and we participated in the GRRIPP project through two other organizations apart from ours. So we were in fact three organizations that chose one topic to work on, and we chose an ecological approach for household workers. And there we talked about several cross-cutting topics, the environment and gender and care. And we had support of the two other organizations, and we started a process of education, of raising awareness and entrepreneurship as well. We are very thankful for the fact that we now have the opportunity to bring more visibility on the topic of caregivers and care, just in general. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Charity Chenga. I'm representing the organization Echoes of Humanity. We're based in Zimbabwe. Our project that we're going to be talking about today is a project relating to developing the transport infrastructure for women in rural areas. We're focusing mainly in the rural area that's about 40 miles away from the Great Zimbabwe Ruins in Zimbabwe. The main gist of the aspects of transport for women in this area relates to their livelihood. It's mainly one of the major issues in actually developing their livelihood. So the focus is actually trying to give them some control, some control of their own economic activities in the area. So, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Paramita Sen. I'm here with my colleague Punarbhava Banik in representing Seva Bharat, which is part of the Seva movement out of India. We are at our core, we are a labor union of 2.5 million women in the informal economy. We've been working for about 50 years on issues around visibility of visibilizing women workers, and our project that we've been doing in collaboration with IRDR looks at how we can continue to center women, informal workers in a post-crisis and post-disaster world, and how do we keep protecting their livelihoods. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. And I will ask you to each in turn answer to the question of how you understand or how you define care and what it means for you and the groups you work with. Starting again with Gloria.
Okay, so care. We start off from the most basic point, which is caring, the action of caring. What does that involve? Well, it involves being in charge of assisting, helping another person, another individual, someone else other than yourself, someone that you care for from their basic needs, and to be permanently and continuously aware for caring and of caring for the other person. And this involves an overload for women on women who have always been invisibilized and forced to take care of others within society, but in an individual way. So as ciudadanas cuidando, so as citizen caregivers, we have worked for caregiving to be moved out of the home and to be something that would pertain to communities, so that the community will be in charge of caregiving, and so that this will not only fall on one single person that is in charge of sustaining another person's of life, but care being given within a community, really. Okay, I think that an important point about the definition of care is that care is a concept that the pandemic, amongst many other efforts it had, well, the pandemic placed it within the eyes of the public debate. It became visible. So from our perspective, care is a topic that belongs to the public agenda and should be on debate. And we could say that care is one of the essential elements that sustains life. And care involves multiple aspects. It involves the environment, the community, the families. However, there are some priority groups that have required care and that have required to be addressed by public policy, and for example, young children, people, elderly people, people with disabilities, different groups. There are also other groups that are in themes like poverty, migration, that also require care and social protection. And in that sense, we think that care is an action that should involve social responsibility, in which society could provide a response and answer to society as a whole.
I would like to bring a story here of care, and this care that we can understand, and it goes, and I always say that in our territory, we say, how can you think of care when you are in a land and you are inside a process of organizing, of a global organization where the aim is to work and to bring genocide of the knowledge that are there in those communities, they are there in those territories. So we start from this principle of it is necessary to look after this knowledge, to value this knowledge, and to make this to be part of our families forever. So In our territories, we start from the principle where this care needs to come from the book of life. And the book of life is the knowledge that are there with our parents and grandparents. And this is going to give a structure as a family and children for us to be able to understand how to act upon the difficulties of life. So we'll be more prepared that way. So a strong population are the one who have the identity and knows how to value the knowledge. And I always say that we have to be supported by the roots. So in this sense, this care that we work with this care as well in our territories, which is the same care that she just mentioned. So we are trying to make this more diverse. Thank you.
Within our organization, we have a phrase, and we say that each citizen goes through our hands, through our path, because we have several groups that are organized. We have, for example, one side, household carers, and then we have carers for children, and then carers for elderly people, and then we have caregivers within the health system. And we also have people in charge of administration and management, and there is with this group we refer to people that help within the structuring of institutions and hospitals, but they're not necessarily doctors or nurses. They don't wear that label. But then that leads to the question, who are caregivers? And we don't have a fixed formula or a recipe to talk about care, but there's something that is true. Care is the first pillar for the productivity of any nation. It enables guaranteeing life and living in abundance, quality of life. And we need to value this kind of work. When we hire someone, or when you're going to be hired for a job, the first thing they ask is, what are your abilities? Or how much do you want to make? And how much are we willing to pay you? Now, how much are we willing to pay for the people that we love at home, for all that care that we receive? It's one of the jobs that is less valued, but the one that produces the most to the financial system of all nations. That is why care is related to sustainability, to co-responsibility. Co-responsibility needs to be exist, and also social inclusion. How are we going to guarantee that these people are okay while they take care of others? And also considering that these are subjects and right to the law and right holders, people who should have right to social security and to a minimum wage, to an income that will allow them to live in a good way. This is why we currently have a debate between the different nations, because COVID-19 let us see the crises and the situations that were there underlying, ever present. And now people say, or politicians say, oh yes, we overcame the pandemic and now my country is stable, but we must ask ourselves, what was the cost of that? How many people had to take care of others? And who do we owe our profession, the caring of our children, and the progress of an entire nation? So caregiving is an action, a productive action, and it's actually the epicenter, the center of work. Thank you.
For our organization, care comes in two ways. It's for the person being given care and the person giving care. Now, from the perspective of the person who's receiving care, we're looking at the welfare of the individual. We now want to move things from an environment where people look at cure, but also look at well-being as part of and parcel of care. We are also looking at issues of prevention, and I think the COVID pandemic brought that on within our environment. We're also looking at issues around choices, and choices are associated with information. What we're looking for is for informed decisions that need to be made by the person who is also who is receiving care. So issues around knowledge are very, very important. It's not just about receiving the care that is that the caregivers are going to give them, but it's also about making choices and making decisions associated with the care that is being given. Also, not only by the caregivers, but plus also professionals. I think choices need to be made there so that people are aware of what is being done to them and what can be done for them. Now, on the other side is the caregivers. There is a great need for support for the caregivers. In the environment I come from a family perspective, it's always been a specific individual. The specific individual is always the daughter-in-law who carries the burden of caring for the family. Now, not only the COVID pandemic, but also the HIV pandemic saw women, especially wives, the younger wives, actually looking after the whole family without equipment, taking risks not only in terms of their own social interactions with other people, tiredness or whatever, but the risks of actually infection, of transferring infection and everything else. So those are issues that we actually need to consider, we are actually looking at. Plus also in terms of looking at the caregivers, it's also facilitating them with the correct equipment. It's not only about gloves, it's not only about the aprons, which is what the AIDS pandemic, the COVID pandemic brought about. This was highlighted in terms of support from governments and everybody else. But once the COVID pandemic has moved away, all those support network, the support equipments have actually gone out. And now people are having to pay for those equipments in an environment who have no access to these equipments. But it's also in addition to those infection-related equipment, but it's also the physical support that people have to have now. In the community that I work in, a lot of complaints are about back problems. They're about knee problems. These things are usually brought about by actually having to look after somebody. There's no training in relation to how to protect them. It's usually training, or the work that they do is usually about protecting the person that they're looking after, but not protecting themselves. So for me, issues around training, and for our organization, issues around training, not only the providing knowledge about illnesses and issues around infection to the those receiving care, but there's also a large need of training related to how to support other people, plus also how to support themselves, regardless of whether it's whatever gender we're working with. But I think that is that is crucial within our work. So, yeah.
Thank you to everyone for covering a significant number of my points. So it's one of the benefits of going at the end. Just a couple of things. I'm just going to reiterate, just touch upon some of the points that people have mentioned so we can see the commonalities in the definitions, right? So a couple of challenges, right? Visibilizing care work, like care and care work, understanding that it's integral to how we as a human society interact with each other. Bringing care out of the home, right? Not thinking of it as an individual responsibility, but something that communities need to take on. So building on all of these points, a couple of things that when you approach care and care work, from a labor union perspective is to think about, we think of care as both paid and then unpaid. So much of what we think about it is unpaid care work, and trying to figure out how to bring care back into the, I don't want to say productive economy because it makes it seem like I want to monetize it. And I think Maria's really explained it beautifully why care work and care isn't about monetizing it and making it an economic activity, but giving it the recognition it deserves and understanding that without care work, nothing that we deem productive really happens. But in that sense, what are then the economic opportunities around care? I still have to go, I'm still representing a trade union. So we have to think about care work as an economic opportunity, and looking at care through that lens, right? Both as a way to, as something that keeps women away from economic opportunities. So for instance, when we're talking about care work around women being responsible for getting water to the houses, right? So the amount of time that's going in bringing water away. So what does infrastructure around that look like? Care infrastructure for childcare, elderly care in low-income communities that are vulnerable, which can't afford to deal with the private sector. So thinking of care as a barrier to economic growth and economic empowerment, while simultaneously thinking of care as an opportunity for women to grow themselves, right? If we are going to gender this, and we have, care work is heavily gendered, then how do we make sure that women are going to get fair wages, dignified work conditions around that? However, this is still looking at care at an individual level. One of the lessons that we've learned through, we'll talk a little bit more about COVID in a while, I'm sure, but just thinking about the responsibility that states have to care for their citizens, right? So thinking about, I mean, we think about it as social security, as pensions, and UCL is currently fighting these battles yourselves, right? But what is the responsibility that states and our societies have to care for us as citizens, to care for us as those who live within their borders, right? So bringing in the conversations around social security, around what that means, around what it means to not be abandoned and to not be destitute in a world where maybe crises and disasters becoming a little bit more common.
Thank you very much, everyone. Just a little reminder to everyone to speak slowly because of translation. Se pueden hablar un poquito más despacito para la traducción. So next question is if you can all explain a little bit more about the work you have been doing in your project and organization, specifically in the context of COVID-19, and share a bit the lessons learned with our audience tonight, and explain what you have been doing, how you have been coping, resisting, what strategies of resistance and surviving you have developed within the context of your project and your activities in your different countries. And again, empezamos con Chile.
So with regards to the question in citizens, caregivers, it is part of the committee to work with the part of the aid in Chile, and we've been fighting after, over, and before the pandemic. It was a fight for the caregiver systems at a plurinational level, and in 2021, we started the project GRRIPP in the middle of the pandemic, and it was focused on the care, and we carried out several participating methodologies with the community. We tried to reduce the concept of caregiving, and we wanted to increase their needs, and that was very successful, and the community was very grateful for all of that. And the community has continued a self-management process because they want to reinforce the care in the community. And thanks to that, we've been working, and last year we worked together with one of the departments of the government of Chile, and we set in motion the first parameter regarding caregivers that started in the Media Luna neighborhood in Chile. together with the municipality, and thanks to their own diagnosis, we could see that the population, women, mostly women, were looking after the elderly people, people with disabilities, and they really needed to organize themselves regarding care. So that's why we started this first pilot. And this is a great initiative in the Chile institutions because we are giving care the importance it deserves at a national level. And people, women, are their most important people because they talk about their needs. But of course, we are also covering their needs together with their local regions, with the government, and through other organizations such as ours. So we could work together and we could develop this caregiver community in the south of Chile, in Mariquina, in the region of Los Rios. So we are very happy with the process, with the results, and we really hope to keep working on this and that we can keep working on care at a global level because it is completely important because women cannot do it on their own. Care should be done by everyone, but we should work with the women who are caregivers. We don't want to be just listeners. We, as women, we should carry out our own projects. We should develop the caregivers communities. So our project was a project that was carried out in 4 cities through by several organizations in Argentina, in Colombia, and that was very interesting because we could share several approaches in which we worked on, and we could provide a gender approach. And we think there is a need to keep moving forward regarding the social part. Everyone should be a caregiver, the government, the central government, the regional government, the market has also needs to provide an answer, the families, everyone. And how can we create a new paradigm regarding care? So our main work was focused on the needs of care. So we worked with people, we carried out several surveys with the people who require some care. We worked with the universities, and we wanted to have more knowledge. And we carried out some maps, some cartographies to see what the needs were to keep moving in the proposals of public policies. And it is very important to visualize, to value the work of caregivers, and we need to distribute in an equal way between women and men that care. We need to reduce the workload, the non-paid workload that women usually do through care services. Most of us are sociologists, are architects, and I think while I was talking about it, it's great to have this territory approach. It is very important to see what's happening in those territories. And it is very important to democratize care. We need to redistribute the offer, and the government and the market can take over those responsibilities. And we need to change the concept that the people who cannot pay for care service should have access to the care service. And we need to destroy those roles regarding women looking after people. And what are the recommendations? There should be a diagnosis on needs. How can we work with several stakeholders? We need to keep moving forward regarding agreements with the university and academia, and we also need to contribute with these systems of care. And in the pandemic, all these problems were completely visible, but there is one very specific example which is very hopeful. For example, in Argentina, there is one proposal of a care system, and there is also one in Chile. The government has proposed a national care system, and we are working with the Department of Accommodation and Housing so that we can provide and we can help, because some community centers are going to be built. And I think there are many initiatives that are very important and that could be very essential for this challenge. And for example, in Bogota, the regional government in Bogota has been the first one in having a care system. So of course, we can say that there are some care systems that are covering a territory, and there are many interesting proposals.
So we have a principle that all of us, when we come to the world, all of us, we have a gift. And when these people come, nobody comes here by chance. So from this principle, we are speaking. And we say that we work with the knowledge of the people. And through this work with the knowledge of the people, but when the pandemic hit, our territory was already mobilized in a way that we said that it would be to face a war of something that was unknown. We didn't know what we were going to face. And that was that mobilization from the principle of life itself, that we say that all of us have a responsibility independently of our age, and each of us acts according to the quantity of their strength at that particular moment. So no force, no energy can be lost. And it's this construction that we distribute the knowledge, the wisdom, and we value each subject at that moment. And from this philosophy, which was fundamental for us, the facing the pandemic, that's how we face the pandemic in our territory. Therefore, we did a construction when the pandemic hit from a principle that we were having for the third year of encounters of healers, of midwives, and I am a healer myself, which means a healer that comes from the forest. So when the pandemic hit, we were ready in our territories, and also other territories were mobilized already. And this encounter started in 2016 with 200 people, and 2 years later, many hundreds of more people were mobilized. So it was not an encounter only of our territory. We were already talking about having it was a global encounter, because we saw how important that was and how we are one people only. Because through this encounter, we noticed this, because I actually work at a workshop, which is extraction of essential oils and ancestral knowledge. So I give this workshop, and I always say that the extraction of essential oil is only a bait, because when people come, we work a lot more with the ancestral wisdom, the knowledge from the forest, knowledge of our people, than the essential oil itself. So the essential oil is the last thing that we actually work with. So we develop all these other topics. And at that, I've had people from 5 different countries in my house and one of these experiences, one of these workshops. That's why we say it's not only an encounter of our people, but it is an encounter of the world. And an encounter, a meeting, that I always say that 15 or more people come to my workshop. it usually would be 15 people, and sometimes now we already have 50, sometimes we have 50 people. And the dynamics in which we work, it's amazing. When we start speaking, everyone starts speaking the same language. In this dynamics, nobody is in the way. Everyone just adds, they multiply, and we realize how we're strong in our territory. We're diverse, but we are complete. And it was from this mobilization, from this wisdom, that we had strength enough to face the pandemic, not only in my community, not only in my territory, but in many other places. I had the opportunity to do an exchange program in Africa, in Senegal. And we would ask them, we would call them, how are you guys? What are you doing? And they would say, we have these and these plants. And it was the same plants that we had. And when we would talk to people from Chile, from Argentina, from Paraguay, or people from Germany, when they would call us, they would say, this is happening here. And in my family has such and such symptoms. And then we would say, okay, so when in your family, you have these symptoms, what did your grandmother do? What was the plant that your grandmother used to use? And then many times they would say, oh, okay, I'll tell you later. So that was the time when they would do this consultation in their own environment. And it's funny when I say this, because sometimes people ask, oh, you speak all these languages. How do you know all these plants? And I reply calmly, I say, I don't. But for us to help and to care for each other, we don't need to know everything. We just need to provoke a thought. We're not here to be the owners of the truth. We are here to be to provoke ourselves, each other. And that's what we did as a territory. We provoked the other territory. Go and look for your own essence, look for your own history. And so then when pandemic hit our community, we were already so much into how the symptoms were working and how they were acting in the system. And so we had more information about the virus than the health secretary of the municipality. And through this mobilization, we had WhatsApp groups, we had videos to guide everyone. And we're also part of a council made up of 54 associations, so 54 communities. And we would speak in these groups, in these different groups. And it was so big, this mobilization, that one municipality invited us to participate in the live to talk about how the virus was acting, how it was going about, and because of our guidance. And through us, through this information, they also started guiding the hospitals. And then one day I arrived at the hospital and they told me, so we're using the tea that you taught us in the live that you shared with us. And it was so deep because after this live, we would meet people in the streets and because we had made a list, we made an emergency list of the plants that could be used. And so when people would see us in the street, they would say, oh, can you add to your list such and such plant, because that's also a good plant. So we would incorporate this information. So now we have over 100 plants that all these families helped us to develop. And we also mobilize in the state through, we began a mobilization in our state. We went to the regional level and we went to the national level. We had a petition with 1 million signatures forcing the government to recognize this knowledge, this wisdom as a ancestral medicine, a principle that can help families and help families to mobilize themselves and to have this care. This didn't mean that we were invalidating any medicine. No, on the contrary, we were saying that both medicine are fundamental to life at that moment and at all moments. They're both always important. So that's what we did. So through that, we had a mobilization in our territory, but also at a national level, because at the time, the government was denying the existence of the virus. So this was fundamental for us because it trespasses, our view. It goes beyond, because sometimes we try to close concepts. So it goes beyond these things. And then through that, the government also recognized that this is important. And now we are discussing live pharmacies, and we have this larger debate to work with the forest through the wisdom and through the medicines. And we open this dialogue so that we can have a wider debate. And we went to the parliament to say, actually, the municipal council, to recognize these things in the community.
So I'm going to take just a couple of words of the previous speaker, which is to provoke. We are here to provoke. Everything is already documented. We have analyzed several years regarding caregiving, the feminist movement, the environment movement. Now we are talking about plants. We are talking about ancestral medicines. So we need to think again a strategy to get in touch with with nature. For example, now we could talk about the event in Turkey, and we could talk about what it is going to happen, what it is going to represent, because we need to rebuild a country, and who is going to rebuild their history, because it is very important to stand up again how women and men communicate regarding care or when these catastrophes happen. So today, more than ever, the debate on care is not only about a political debate. It is about taking movement. It is about acting. And I'm very grateful because now we are here talking in front of the academia, of researchers, of diplomats, of students. For example, now the ambassador of Chile is here because they are the decision makers. The global world could be very similar, but when we get deep into the problem, everything could be the same. We are compromised to just one single answer. So what's the strategy? I think we have the pillars established, and I could talk about our organization, about care, because we could listen to the debates. We carried out several surveys, but of course we have the experience. And from that, the central government, the decision makers, those making the law, need to talk and need to start from a reality that affects other people. We should not giving just information and data. We need to talk about people, how to include those people who are building and who are making a great change for a different world. We have a great opportunity on how we can humanize history, on how humans, citizens, can be people who change the world and can make it a better world. The pandemic came to teach several things that maybe many people didn't understand all those things. And of course, all things do not depend on us. The pandemic came to to transform our life, and many things won't change after the pandemic. For example, there were some families who were completely normal. However, one of them had COVID, is compromising other people because these people are compromised, are committed to looking after these people because these people might have some pathologies, and these two people won't be independent because one person is sick and the other one is looking after this person. So what are we doing in order to position ourselves as the world is demanding? We need to think about it, about the things we live every day. Of course, women and men, but many, many men have to look after other people. And maybe they are under a poverty situation because when they are retired, they cannot do it. There are no real policies. For example, in Uruguay, you get money if one of your children are born, and we need that because maybe I don't want to keep working in all professions or systems. Maybe I want to dedicate my life to look after my children, and I should have that right. That should be completely guaranteed. During the pandemic, we faced the problem that many people working at home should stay within those houses because otherwise they could infect other people, they could infect their relatives, and they had to choose between work and their families, and we could live that. We lost millions of jobs, and in the Dominican Republic that happened because of many things, because of lockdown, because of the economic crisis, because the borders were closed, and we said, we need to keep living, or what is it going to happen? We had to keep fighting at the expense of our cost of living, and that's why we started a cooperative. It might look a very individualist initiative, but we are talking about solidarity. That was the only thing that guaranteed health, medicine, and food for all those women who stayed at anyone else's house. And that grew very fast because we could understand the system. So the governments, how are they going to say to me that they are not going to be able to provide inclusion when they are responsible for making decisions? It's about listening to all these people. It's about getting information. This must be a cross-sectional access in all the things that we do, because then we can raise awareness. Because most of the time, when I talk about care, most of the women workers are actually women. When someone is going to be hired so that you can be looked after, you're hiring a woman. In the health system, there are more women than men. Nurses, we're saying that there are more women than men in the health system. So maybe we should raise awareness to break the cultural stereotypes. I'm not talking about sexual stereotypes. So it is here where we reshaped the concept of for capability, because we were giving information about doing home tasks among other services, but we're providing training, because if we're asking for rights, we need to know how to meet our duties. We need to make it visible with dignity for those people who maybe have decided to dedicate their life for care. And we should value that work. And we train the people who look after children. We work with grandparents. And we also work with the elderly people so that they can receive training and they can start also in the labor market. And that's very, very important, because sometimes we could be talking about the person who is requiring that service for care. So the person, the adults, the children were not visible. The part of the people, of the caregivers, that was not visible. That's why it is very important to get the support from the government to make the most of the problem that the world is offering. We should start acting and we should value all citizens because we will all be caregivers and at some stage we will be looked after. Thank you.
Our link with the health sector and the care industry really starts with the HIV pandemic. That's sort of how I'm going to talk about how we moved on to the COVID and how we ended up with the with our project and how it actually links in with the COVID and empowerment of women within our environment. With the HIV pandemic within the rural areas in Zimbabwe, it was owned by international organizations. They're the ones who brought in the solutions. They're the ones who did the counseling. It was all done away from the communities. The community members were actually receivers rather than participants in dealing with the HIV pandemic. Then during that time, slowly but surely, issues of cancer started moving into the environment, and a lot of people were very, very confused between the symptoms that they were experiencing in relation to the symptoms, the diagnosis that they were getting from the doctors. They came to a situation where people were being told that you're not suffering, we don't know what it is, but it's not HIV, but the symptoms were very, very similar to HIV. I remember our organization actually within that time had picked up that cancer had been growing within the Southern African region. So we did a training session within the rural area that we're working in, which to a large extent empowered women and the population within that environment, that the illnesses that they were suffering from, there was a name to it. It was more than just HIV. They needed to, and from that understanding, it actually facilitated some help-seeking behavior with changes within the communities. We actually participated in this and developed this by actually having community engagement activities where we provided leaflets and better information about the cancers, and not only knowing about cancers, but also advising and providing some form of training of how they can identify some basic some of the cancers such as breast cancer, testicular cancer, how they can actually themselves have some independence in identifying whether they're suffering from it or not, so for early diagnosis. This also included prostate cancer, which was quite beginning to be prevalent within the communities. So that to a large extent enables some form of independence for the community members. They had better understanding of what was happening, and were able to at least move away from the understanding that it was just HIV, and they also had some power to a large extent in understanding what was going on with them. Then when COVID came about, unfortunately for them, it's sort of, they just managed to have take some control in what was going on with them. COVID kind of was a surprise for everybody. And what happened with the COVID pandemic within these communities was that there was very, very limited trust of the medication that was being provided. For some reason, people were associated COVID and COVID vaccinations with death, because generally what they used to find was that people would go to have their vaccinations and it wasn't too many days after that they died. And what was interesting about COVID, it moved people from just dealing with the cure, looking at waiting until they became debilitated before anything was done. People started looking at ways of preventative measures. and they actually re-looked back in their own environment, with their own knowledge of some of the illnesses that were taking place there. And they, like my colleague here, they started looking at using traditional medicines and traditional herbs. And that actually gave them a lot more control of what was happening with them. And it has actually, over time, has actually generated independence in terms of households on how they actually perceived COVID. And it moved from being a life-threatening illness to something that was actually that they could manage. And you'd go into, this was in comparison to the urban areas, there was more knowledge about how to actually look after yourselves. You'd hear that, a certain household had someone suffering from COVID, although the support network remained based in the women, but there was also this strength within them that they actually had the cure themselves. They had that control for the medication for COVID. But also what had happened was that within these environments, the religious charismatic churches had a very strong hold in terms of where people used to go for treatments, where people looked at prophets to actually deal with them. That kind of reduced to a large extent in these areas where people became sort of reverted to the herbal side of things. Access to the modern medication was very, very limited. Also, because despite the fact that there was more money that had been put in, access to it was very, very difficult because, number one, getting to the hospitals was very difficult. And in more cases than not, you'd always find that the hospitals were quite full and so people relied on themselves. Where we came about with our project was in terms of this whole thing. Although earlier we had we had developed a locally appropriate ambulance transport, which we were sort of using donkeys to actually get people to hospital. But we'd actually now started our project looking at appropriate transport, not only for health, but also for livelihood and economic development for the women. So what we have proposed and have put together is trikes with trailers that are powered by solar power. And from this project, what we have found is that it's actually enabling women to have more choices in how they actually develop their own livelihoods. And also that aspect of actually looking at themselves and looking at the traditional medication, traditional herbs to support them, has also increased within not only the local environment, but nationally. What we're finding is that people are actually using some of these traditional herbs, and they're now being sold not only within the larger supermarkets within the country, they're also being exported to the diaspora. So their market is actually expanded beyond just the local market. But what is happening at this stage is that for them to develop beyond what we've got at the moment, they need to be able to market their products themselves and also have the independence to control of the transportation and also have control of the transport to decide whether the choices that they have for them, is it going to be modern medication or is it going to be the local medication? So within our own project, what we're looking at is providing a vehicle to a large extent to the freedom of choices, where I think when it comes to the health sector, it's very, very important for our groups.
So COVID, much like any other disaster or crisis, is not an equal opportunity offender. It affects different communities in very different ways. While a health pandemic and a health crisis for large parts of the world, for many communities, it was a crisis of governance. It was a crisis of livelihoods. It was a crisis of migration. The communities that we worked with, we focused primarily on rural communities, which means it wasn't a health crisis. COVID didn't really reach the actual virus, if you're thinking about it, didn't actually reach these underserved indigenous communities, which are rarely served by anything mainstream. What did happen, however, was government resources, which are anyway hard pressed to get there, weren't getting there as much as they should, and much as they could. And it was a livelihood crisis, and migrants were coming home. These are villages where men have migrated out for a while, migrated out for many, many years. Women were holding down the fort. However, with the crisis in cities, men all migrated back. So we're talking about a significant increase in care work burdens. We're talking about an increased mental health crisis that we still haven't really figured out the extent of, and a complete drying up of income. So that's the space that we were at when these communities came to us and said, well, do something. That's your job, figure it out. So we had to do a couple of things. We had to figure out what the scope of the problem could even be. And then we had to figure out how to target this at two levels, right? One is to be able to do anything, to be able to make it to the next day, you need income, you need money. You're going to need to figure out how to pay for your food, how to pay for your water. And then after that is taking on some of the systemic issues and making sure that when the next crisis rolls around, as it inevitably will, that you've made some lasting changes. So this partnership allowed us, so we had to figure out how to get the data. To do that, we realized we could do two birds in one stone, right? I could get data. We could also use this money to train, I think we trained some 30 young women across these communities to become data collectors. India does have an advantage. We have a pretty solid secondary education for girls. So girls do get educated. What you do after that with that education is a whole other story, but you have basic literacy. And another privilege that we have is our internet connectivity is actually quite, it exists, which after meeting a lot of our partners here is something I've realized is not something we can take for granted. So building on these, we trained these young girls to use their cell phones and to start viewing the family cell phone as an income earning asset, as a productive asset that you could do something with. So we train these girls on how to conduct research. So all the data that we've presented here that are up on the reports, it's all being collected by a young girl, somewhere between the ages of 16 and 19 in a rural community somewhere in India, who now continues to do that work. So we figured out what the extent of the problem was. And then we realized that it is, I mean, that's where we realized livelihood crisis. We had to figure out what to do next because these people just weren't being able to make their food stretch as long as it needed to. This data, so while we continue working on just coming up with some livelihood opportunities generated through this project, the rest of the work, which is really where we specialize, I guess, is the systemic change. So this data was then handed to communities, and through a process like community leaders took this data to basically push for increased social security, right? Because the next crisis is going to come around. While we have explored livelihood diversification, digital, figuring out digital means of getting women to put out their handmade products online, all of these can maybe achieve, like how many women can you train to figure out how to use Amazon in a week, right? Or in a month. You're not, in India, the scale of the problem is 600 million women. and then that's just one country. If you think about all the countries here, the scale is really quite extensive, right? So training that many women, figuring out how to get markets for that many women, as much as we all want to buy local, there's just so much we can buy. So trying to figure out what that space exists, right? So we continue doing that piecemeal work, but the women leaders really campaigned with local governments. And that was the other thing, the crisis of governance that we saw. These women insisted that the power get devolved back down to your local governments, because that's where their influence is. They know that local municipality, they know the local ward councillor. So campaigning for improved relief packets, right, to ensure that the relief system does exist that will tide them through the next crisis. Understanding that relief packets have to look different for different communities, right? Women when you're talking about floods, women do need to figure out sanitation very differently from men do. Disabled communities need to figure out sanitation very differently from those who aren't disabled. It's a whole range of problems, right? So community leaders who are living that day-to-day crisis in conversation with community, with local elected leaders is where we saw a lot of that coping strategy, right? So in the process of trying to build a system that helps them tide through the next crisis, but also then building their own capacity to continue dealing with this, because once this is not going to solve the problem forever, right? But so they do need to be equipped to deal with the next strategy. So that's really where we ended up. Right? I don't think that's listening to anybody. Cell phone technology, we can't handle it. We really can't expect our women, we expect everybody in the world to. But so that's really basically where we ended up seeing it, right? So you figure out how to get income opportunities to women, and this sounds weird, right, as a trade union to be like, oh, but an income opportunity is a stopgap measure, but that it is. You're trying to make sure that they tide it through, that they can make it through to the next stage, and then building up the capacity of these communities to continue fighting these, because these aren't one-off fights. They're going to have to fight the next day as well, and for the next crisis. So figuring out their capacity and eventually trying to create systems that will look after populations, that will look after citizens when a crisis hits. So building the capacity and then building that system. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the six of you. We have a little bit of time for questions. I believe there are some mics around. What we do is we collect the questions and then they'll answer. Yeah. Just raise your hand if you want to ask a question. Make a comment. Anyone?
Please, not all at once, just one by one.
Comment. Yeah. Or comments? Yeah.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. This is a question for Paramita. Because I've read your report, it's going to be technical. Sorry, and I really encourage everyone to read the report from Terra, which is available on the GRRIPP website. One of the findings that really struck me was that the set of recommendations for improving women's livelihoods, we're talking about informal workers, really depended on the situation of those women, whether they were willing or able to change their livelihoods or whether they couldn't. And I was wondering if you could share a bit more details around this and what does that mean for a researcher and also then for recommendation for anyone who wants to help them?
Yeah, so the finding over there was, so we worked with women across many ages, right? And the groups that we work with are what I call home-based workers. So they work out of their home, and the work that they're doing is they're making handheld informal cigarettes. They're called BRIs in case anyone wants to. So they roll cigarettes, and that's what they're selling. and this is something that their family has maybe done for like 3-4 generations minimum, right? So one of the things that we found, so while with the young girls, we found a lot of opportunity, and there was a lot of aspiration there. The slightly older women, for a variety of reasons, weren't looking to diversify their trades. They wanted to continue doing that work. Now, as a trade union person and as a researcher, that gets frustrating for me sometimes, right? Because I'm coming at it from my perspective and I'm saying, well, why aren't you willing to learn something new? We'll teach you, we'll get you the resources. But being part of this partnership, I think, and listening to all these absolutely brilliant perspectives has made me realize that for these women, right, it's not a question of willing to change or unwilling to change or capacity to change. There's a very practical consideration. They're home-based workers because they have to be. They're home-based workers because that is where their world is. They live in those communities. Mobility is not something that's easy. So we have to then figure out, I mean, while I can hope that maybe there's so many opportunities and why aren't you taking it, those frustrations are mine. For these communities, trying to figure out what works for them where they are at, right? Coming up with a solution that works for them. Livelihood diversification is not the easiest. I mean, I think there are a bunch of us here who are from universities. If any of us have tried to change a major, we know what that means, right? You want to go from political science to biochemistry today, it's going to be stressful, right? So asking these women to do that over and above all of their work is not the best idea. And that. I hate to say this, but that was something I had to really come to terms with over the last 2 years while working on this. As a policy recommendation, a lot of what we see when it comes to working on women's thing is bringing up a skilling center, right? So you set up a skilling center and you try to upskill the women either through teaching them stitching or teaching them basic computer literacy skills. Both of these in these contexts require mobility. You have to make it to the skilling center. There is no public transportation. You are not setting up a childcare infrastructure so that these women can leave their children or leave their all their other care work at home, right? They still have to stand in line and get water. They still have to stand in line and figure out how to get their fuel, right? So when we're trying to think of policy recommendations and like the sense, I mean, so from a researcher perspective, the positionality, right, of where you're at and what it is that you have to recommend. So some of that work, which is why it was so important for us to have these young girls who basically told us, I mean, these questions don't make sense. Our mothers, you're not understanding where our mothers and our grandmothers and our aunts are coming from. So revise them. And then from a policy perspective, which is what my co-PI handles, is really trying to figure out, work with governments to be like, it's great if you have these resources, but that's something that you decided from the top that came from a bureaucratic perspective, but you're never going to meet success. And when you don't meet success, the question always becomes, oh, but women aren't willing, right? So why invest in it another time? But that's not the right question. Women weren't willing because you didn't meet them where they were at. So some of that intersectionality lens, some of that understanding the gendered experience of livelihood is something that we have to like figure out how to bring a little bit more into policy recommendations. The policy consultations we did for this project, we tried to bring that in, and that's a long battle. It's hard enough for us to understand that, but then trying to convince a bunch of government officials who have a lot of other things that they have to on their plates, like trying to get them to understand that is, yeah, that's a fun battle. We'll update you in 5 to 10 years. Get in touch then.
First, Sarah, Maite first, then we'll collect. Okay, yeah, go ahead. Maite, and then Sarah. And those who are online can also send questions to the chat section.
So first of all, congratulations to all the panelists. It's wonderful to be here and to listen to all the process that you've shared. I wanted to share this question and see who can answer. So what is the relationship that you see between care and rights and security and women's security? Because I'm sure care has a place amongst these topics. So it's also the topic of safety. How do you see the intersectionality or the cross between relationships, care, security? Hi, I am Maite Rodriguez Landon. I am a regional coordinator. Thank you, Maite, for that question.
Phrase on my mind at times when we talk about increasing the value or making visible archiving. Can you hear now? Am I good? Better. Speak up. I try to project like I'm lecturing. So that's very well. Okay. So my question is generally for everyone, and it's profound. Everyone's been talking about making the care work visible and thinking around the value of that. And we know that it's mostly women's work. A concern I always have is when we increase visibility of certain occupations and we give value to them, often what we find is the gendered, who's involved in it changes. So when we think about, we have male chefs and we have women cooks, and we find that that value often means that it changes who's actually doing the work, and as value increases, then men often become those who take on that work, and therefore we create a different problem. So my question is really, how can we make sure we increase visibility and value, but we also make sure we keep that gender equality information?
Do you have a question from online? I think it's best we take all the questions because then we're kind of running out of time. And if anyone else wants to say something, now is the moment, raise your hand.
So this is a question from Suzanne Kozak. Have you experienced any resistance from men? And if so, how have you and women participating or responded or managed? This is for all the panels. And then the second question from Nina. What challenges did you face in mobilizing the members of your communities who are obviously underserved, underpaid, etc.? And what concrete steps did you have to take to mobilize people in participating in this project?
Thank you. So what I'll do, I'll give them back the floor in turn, and that will be their concluding remarks, unless there's someone else who wants to ask a question. Mabuba, last question. But then if you're staying with us for the reception, you have more time to talk to our guests, so don't worry.
Thank you for the wonderful presentations that we had today. And what are the commonalities that you have observed, the 6 projects that you have been doing? So in context of care and in context of livelihood. My specific question is for Gloria, that she was talking about caregiving to a family member. So how she can take it to the community level or at the policy making level. So that is one of the findings, if she has anything.
Okay, so I will give you back the floor. I just quickly translate to Silvanete, who has got an issue with Zoom. Teve várias perguntas que são comuns para todos. Uma foi qual a relação entre segurança, direitos e cuidados. Foi uma das perguntas comuns. A outra é como a gente pode aumentar a visibilidade e reconhecimento desses trabalhos de cuidado invisíveis que são feitos por mulheres, sem que se torne necessariamente um trabalho masculina, né? A Sara estava comentando que muitas vezes quando a gente aumenta a visibilidade e a valorização, acaba se tornando um espaço de homens. Então, como a gente trabalha essa atenção? E teve uma pergunta do chat online sobre se houve alguma forma de resistência por parte dos homens. E a última pergunta online foi se houve quais foram os desafios de mobilizar as comunidades em um contexto de poucos recursos e dificuldade financeira. Você não precisa responder a tudo, pode responder só uma. No, you don't all have to answer everything. You can pick what you want to answer to, and this will also be your concluding remark. So again, starting with Gloria, and then right here.
I'm going to answer the question that the women in the back did. And I think it is with regards to the value of caregiving and visualization as caregivers in Chile. We were insisting on and fighting for many years, and many organizations started a protest in 2018 with caregivers, and we repeated that 2 years later. And we said that looking after people is also working, and this is a lesson, but it shouldn't be mandatory. And this is part of the system that should offer several services, and each person, each family, and each member of the community should choose if they want to look after that person or if there are other external services might be able to look after that person. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it because we always think that it's something that it is mandatory, it's something that women should do. We should work on that, and we should talk about making an election, because people have been looking after for many years, but actually these people don't want to do it because maybe their parents were harassing the people who are their caregivers. So we should be talking about violence. And regarding the question of communities, our project, the community was very close to our neighborhood. That's why many caregivers took part in the project. The elderly people, people with disabilities, and the community in general, neighbors, leaders from different communities. Of course, caregivers were very important, but they were not the only ones who took part in the project. But the main idea was that the other stakeholders could take part, because it was very important to understand why care was very important. And we scaled it up. And we went to a park and we started talking about care. And for the first time, people were talking about care. So it's something that it is very natural that people don't think about it. People don't talk about care. So for the very first time, people were talking about it, and community could understand what the problem, what the need was. It was very important to externalize all these, and all the members of the community should know that this person is looking after another person, just in case there is an emergency, because the community should support the members. There should be self-management, and members should keep organizing projects, take part in organized projects, and it is very important that there is a collaboration and that people work with the regional government. And also we were working in the south of Chile, and we worked with that approach because we wanted to tackle the communities in a general way. We addressed the community of a specific neighborhood, and of course we addressed elderly people, people with disabilities, everyone, and they could talk for the very first time about care. And of course, they all wanted that the neighborhoods were like a more accessible neighborhood. They wanted the neighborhood to look after them, that it would neighborhoods were more accessible because some areas were more rural. So there were many aspects, different aspects in that neighborhood, because there were very old buildings. There were very modern new houses. Many people were living in many different things, but actually the best house was not accessible for people with disabilities. So we could see the neighborhood as a public space. And actually the members of the community went to create a care center, and that was very important because the community could join and could join to the regional government, and they could keep moving forward with the programs in Chile. And it's very important that all programs in Chile have this approach, care approach, because not all communities are the same. There is a great diversity of people and territories. We should talk about the rural area, the urban area, the north and the south in the case of Chile. So it is very important that everyone takes part in the project, that the projects are completely open and that we all work in care matters, because at any stage, someone will have to look after other person and people will be looked after. So now it's 7 o'clock and we're running out of time. I just wanted to say that. Baika asked a question, and I think that was very important regarding care, safety, and rights. So we usually talk about cities and territories that look after. And we're talking about walking, living without being afraid, without being scared. And it is very important that public spaces are completely safe, that the infrastructure covers the needs of women and the demands of women. I think that's essential. Women who are caregivers, young women, the elderly people should be acknowledged and recognized in order to have safe places and that people can be protected and that they can have all the rights they need. And they should live with the rights. And these rights should be completely met. And I think it is very important that the organization of the neighborhoods, of the territories, I think I remember what Gloria was talking about. We carried out several workshops in Santiago in a very consolidated neighborhood, but actually it was very old in the city. And there were many women who were caregivers. And actually that was the first time that these women could share their problems. And that was a huge change, because from that moment we could start organizing several events on communication. And actually, many women who are caregivers feel that they are very lonely, and that's a problem for them. And I think this is a matter of public health, and we should consider all these. 1 minute left.
These are themes that sometimes we ask, and there are so many answers, but there is no recipe. It's very important to have the willing to action instead of being idle. And I think I remembered in 2006, I was in Jos area. And then when I gave this explanation, it was important to understand that we are talking about a subject that is spaces. When I arrived, the majority of women, they are participating of this association that I'm part of. 32 people from this association, there were only 2 men, everybody else were women. So we used to plan and things didn't happen. And there was an answer. So we used to say, we are going to see what's going to happen. And this, we are going to see what's going to happen. It took a while to identify this. And then we realized that if I don't go and someone in our house is going to go, but this, let's see what's going to happen, didn't appear. And who decided was someone at home. And this doesn't mean that this is going to be a decision that could be made then. And many times we can see this as a kind of violence. Sometimes we look and see, oh, you see a lot of women, so you think women participate a lot, but sometimes you don't realize that many times they are there because the men told the women, go there to listen. So we are in a moment that we are going to discuss women's health. And we are, so men would go behind the wall to hear if we are saying something that would go against them. So based on that, we decide to change the ways that we used to do work. We talk about the whole family, and we start stimulating everyone to participate of the meetings. And so the child is going to work. No, this child is not going to work. Let the children play. So this was one of the ways that we managed to face the situation, this kind of violence. But we start realizing this is an educational structure. When some time ago, a teacher asked, how was the activity at home? And then before my homework, I had to help wash the dishes. And the teacher said, oh, it's just gay people who does that. So in that sense, we provoked a meeting with the Education Secretariat, and I'm just talking about this because sometimes we don't realize what's going on. There are many ways, there's many things happening. It's very important to face this diversity on the ground, and this happens in the rural areas. So sometimes you see this kind of violence in the cities, but we are living in the rural area, so you go through all this.
I would like to say a couple of things regarding the questions. One of them is, what does care mean in a cross-sectional way with the rights matter? If we are working, for example, about work usually generates rights because work is actually an essential right. I need to have the right to work. That's why I should be guaranteed the right to health, right to get money, to get food, to get clothes, to get dressed. So of course we need to talk about public policies. The public policies should create a system of guarantees for these caregiving communities, because we are not talking about one community, we are not talking about one person, we are talking about a community of people who are caregivers. So we should make the difference that care in the factories, in the work environment. So all the public policies should be designed for that. And of course, condition transfer, as the one we know, payments who completely guarantee that people can get the money enough to look after other people. But when it comes to programs that allow caregivers to be paid in order to do that, even though if it's a relative, in the Dominican Republic, we have a pilot program for that. So, for example, we're saying this work is supported by real public policies. And immediately, not only men will love to do it because they have the guarantee, but also the generation subject. Because most of the time it's like, I need to look after. There's the case in South America, for example. I bring someone from the rural area so that this person can help me with the house task. And most of them are teenagers. But for example, most of the cases, grandmothers are the ones we are looking after, other people. But if we start putting some value, if care is supported by the public policies, young people will want to take part in the care field?
Paramita, you have 30 seconds.
For me, I think right from the onset, I think we're starting from not such a comfortable premise. We need to really sort out the definition of care, because what we're discussing here is care just as those, you know, looking after. We need to look at the whole aspect of care as a bigger picture, because what's going to happen is, in solving this, we're just going to leave women in the care of, you know, hands-on. The care industry is very, very large. You have to look at, when you're looking at these things, I think we need to also look beyond just it's like being a nurse. You're looking at yourself as just being a nurse, but within the health sector, there are also there are radiographers, there are people who deal with the ears, there are people who deal with all sorts of things. Now, when if you're going to put value to the care industry, what's going to happen is women are going to remain just the hands-on carers, whilst the men come in and start looking at the alternatives and in the value added to the care industry. We have found ourselves, I'm an RMN, I'm a nurse. And for years, I just remained a nurse and never developed beyond that. But my male counterparts have moved it on to something else, to being radiographers, to being consultants, to being nurse practitioners, to being, you know, something else. And I think it's very, very important that if we're going to lift the care aspect from women to actually generalize it, we don't, in a few years' time, start complaining that women are the ones who are despite being paid, they're the ones who are remaining the hands-on, whilst the men take over the more responsible and more controlling roles. And this is really in relation to the question of visibility that was asked, that why is it women were the ones who were cooking, but now the bulk of male chefs are male, and they're making, you know, they're developing themselves. And it's the same thing with all the other industries that women have been associated with. After a while, we find ourselves the ones just doing the basics. I think it's where we're starting off with the argument. We need to move it on beyond that, so that when we encourage the value given to women to be beyond just those who are in that caring, in that, you know, primary care position. I'm looking for a little bit more. I don't know what
30 seconds. So just one of the things that I want to say is that all of this work we've presented projects, but all of this work is deep work. It takes decades. It takes a very, very long time, right? Mobilizing is not a one-time thing. It's ongoing, it's continuous. You have to continue to invest in communities. And our perspective is you have to invest in community leaders and trust your women leaders, right? And that, because they're the ones who are going to remain, and they're the ones who are going to tackle issues of security. They're the ones who are going to have to face that backlash, right? So investing in them, building up their work to change the mindsets, that's really where a lot of this work, I think, remains.
Thank you so much. Very efficient. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. For those of you who can, we do have a reception just outside the room. So if you want to stay a little bit longer and discuss more of the topics with our guests, you're really welcome. Thanks for everyone who joined online. Boa noite, buenas noches. Gracias, obrigada. Thank you.